So this video clip that you're about to watch is all filmed for a student art group called ConcordiART here in Montreal. They wanted me to do a Q&A session with them where I took questions from my followers and from some of theirs on Instagram. And instead of just putting it on Instagram, I figured I would upload it to YouTube as well. So here it is, and I hope you enjoy. If you had any questions about my practice and how I make things, there you go. Hi there, my name is Mundy. I'm a Montreal-based photographer and digital artist, and today I'm going to be answering some questions that I received for this Q&A session with ConcordiART, and I'd just like to say thank you to them for reaching out and wanting me to be a part of this. So I received a good amount of questions, and I tried to sequence them in order to make it make sense, so we'll just get right into it and see how it goes. How did it all start? My parents bought me a little Polaroid digital camera when I was like 15, I think, going on a school trip to New York City. It was really not good at all, but at the time I thought it was awesome because it was my own camera and I'd been borrowing theirs to kind of take photos. But once I had my own camera, I was able to kind of go out and take photos at parties I was at, or visiting friends, or going on little trips or whatever. So for a few years, I was kind of just that guy that had a camera with him all the time at parties and all this kind of stuff. You know, you always see like a dude with a camera taking photos of things. And eventually I think I started seeing more artistic photography on the internet, on websites like DeviantArt and Flickr and a bit of MySpace back in the days. That might date me a little bit in this segment, but I don't really care. So yeah, I went from more like using the camera as a tool to document what I was doing to slowly starting to use it for more creative photo shoots, where I would go out into the woods near my parents' home and make photos by myself using a tripod and using the self-timer on my camera. And to this day, my process is not that different. I use a tripod and a programmable remote a lot, and we'll get into that later. I studied commercial photography for 1 year after getting a general arts degree. It wasn't really for me. It was in a commercial photography program. I dropped out. I started working factory jobs and really kind of just manual labor type jobs while doing photography on the side, trying to be more consistent with it and make better and better work over time. And today I work with a few different galleries, and I work independently as well. And I work part-time as a photographer for a small business. And when I'm not doing that, I'm working on my own personal projects with art. What inspires you as an artist? Where do you get your inspiration from? I'm mostly inspired by a lot of other art that I see. There's never really one topic in particular that inspires me, but it can kind of be a myriad of things. It's a lot of themes of like conflict, division, one versus many. Like a lot of my images will have one figure and a lot of other figures depicted against them or something like this. So there's always these kinds of conflict-based themes that I'm working in. But sometimes I am just interested in kind of making a beautiful image that isn't specifically tailored to probe at an idea. That's kind of how I like to work a lot actually. I'll just kind of take these themes and these symbols and kind of arrange them in images and almost just vaguely gesture at ideas instead of trying to necessarily tell a narrative. So if I ever feel like I'm lacking inspiration or something, I'll often just watch really beautiful movies, look at art blogs, things like this. I used to go to galleries and museums once in a while, but now I don't because of everything that's going on, unfortunately. How do you come up with your photographs, and what is the creative process behind them? This kind of piggybacks off of the last question actually, which is good. So the way I work is most of the time I'll start out by drawing out my concepts, and that's about 80% of the time, 85% of the time. I'll build them up slowly over time. Very rarely an idea will come fully formed. If I'm walking down the street and I see something and I think, oh, I should do like this there. It doesn't really happen that much. Usually it'll start from just a perspective or a color palette or a composition. I might see something and it'll make me think like, okay, I should have like one figure this way and then something dividing the frame and doing that. And I won't know what the figure will be doing. I won't know what the location will be doing, but I'll understand like the basic formal elements of the image. Usually it's the composition, things like this. And then from there, I'll kind of build it up over time until it becomes a fully finalized idea that could probe at some ideas, but sometimes it doesn't. From there, I go to pre-production, which is figuring out the locations where I'll be shooting, finding people that I need to assist me, actually figuring out the logistics of how to make this image happen. I do use a lot of Photoshop in my images, but I like to try to do as much as I can in person on location. And then from there, I shoot the images and hopefully it works out, and I put them together in Photoshop, and depending on how much compositing or color correction is needed, that can take a few hours or a few days. But and that's the process basically. How are you so consistent with your art output, specifically motivation and inspiration wise? How do you manage to stay inspired? This is specifically distinct from where my inspiration comes from, so I wanted to kind of separate those questions. But for me, I've always been the kind of person that wants to make things. Even when I was a kid, I was very creative. I was always writing things, I was always drawing things, I was always attracted to games or modes of expression where there are less limits. So for example, I used to play with Legos, I used to love drawing, I used to love writing. Anything where you can kind of just build and make things, I'm a big fan of that. So for me, it's I need less external motivation because it's something innate in me. But obviously there are days where I don't feel like doing something, for example, if I'm feeling anxious about a photo. So when those days do happen, I kind of just remember that all of the steps that I've taken in my life, I've basically made this path for myself, and it would be a disservice to myself to not keep going forward. I put so much time, so much effort into all of the photos that I've made over the last like 10 years or something, that if I stop now, I'm basically slapping past Sean in the face and telling him like, you didn't do any of this for anything. So for me, it's just a matter of I know what life I want to build, and I'm going to keep working at it, and I'll probably do this till the day I die. I see no reason why I won't. I'm fairly consistent. I try to put out one photo a week at least, along with other content in between, like on social media and such. But in a perfect world, I would be way more consistent, and there's a lot of people that are more consistent than me, so I'm often looking at these people and they inspire me to work harder, and a lot of my friends who make art as well inspire me, and artists that I follow on Instagram that will show love and that I'll show love to them, and just kind of building a community of artists is a good way to inspire each other in that sense. Do you ever get anxious during the prep before a shoot at the location? If so, what headspace do you go to overcome it? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably when I'm most anxious about making an image, because I've built up this idea in my head through my drawings that this is exactly what it needs to look like. So sometimes I will make an image and the shoot will be successful, but it won't necessarily look exactly like I wanted it to in my mind. So that is frustrating, but I usually just try to over prepare. I have multiple contingency plans if I need to. Depends on the image. Obviously, some images are more simple to do than others, and so oftentimes I will plan for the worst. Like if this happens, then this is my backup and things like that. So I think that over preparing, and this kind of lends itself well to anxious people because we already think of all the different ways that things can go wrong. So if you make plans for that, that's probably the best way to go forward and make sure that regardless of what happens, I'll come out of this with something. I think I get most anxious when the photos that I have to do are very time sensitive, or if I know I won't have many chances to do it. So if the weather is perfect and the sky is a certain way and the light is perfect, and or the sun is setting and I don't have much time, if a lot of different external variables are kind of crunching together at the exact same moment, that's when things get a bit anxious. But again, if you plan for it, you can try it again sometime. It's not the end of the world if you don't get it, and I've gotten a lot better at telling myself that. I used to beat myself up if I didn't get a photo and be like, what's wrong with you? You had all this time to prepare, but things come up and you can't always plan for it. When you have a creative block, what do you do to overcome it? I don't really experience creative block that much because I draw out my concepts so much that I have a large pool to pull from. When I do have time to create a photo, or once a week I'll look at my sketches and say, okay, well, what can I do this week? What's reasonable? How much prep needs to go into this image, kind of thing. So I don't really, for me, my issue is more that I struggle to actually get the images done. So if there's an image where I've built it up in my head and it's going to be this amazing thing once it gets done, the anxiety builds a bit more in that sense, where the conflict between what will likely happen and what I want to happen, that's when I get most anxious. But I would recommend this method to everybody. If you do have a practice where you are able to kind of pool ideas and your work isn't like on the moment, spur of the moment type, pure inspiration type thing, I would definitely just amass a lot of ideas, whether you're a photographer, a painter, a sculptor or something. I would really just kind of use that, so that way when you do have those moments where you don't really know what to do, you can just pull from that and it keeps you right on track. If you aren't able to do this though, I think just kind of reassessing and asking yourself big framework type questions will help you get back into the right mindset, in the sense that if you've already poured a lot of time into this, if you've gone to school for art, if you're devoting money and resources and things like this to art, ask yourself, is this really what I want to do? And if it is, and if you answer these questions in the appropriate way, hopefully that will get you into the right headspace. And instead of just kind of going with the flow of life, take a second to pull back and think about why you do this, and does it bring you value, and does it make you happy ultimately? What, in your opinion, would be the first steps to tackle down when starting creative photography? Do you think creatives should surround themselves with creatives from the start, or should they allow themselves to learn through their field and their creativity before surrounding themselves with others in the field? I don't really think there's a right or wrong answer with this. I think you can kind of go either way. I started alone, and that way I felt like I kind of built my idea of what I wanted to make before other inspirations or other outside sources came in. And obviously I had the internet, So that isn't entirely true, but I mean in the sense that if you hang out with people who do the exact same kind of art as you, you'll probably rub off on each other, and not in a bad way or a good way necessarily, but I think that being surrounded with people might influence the way you make art. So if you really wanted to make sure that this is truly my voice and this is what I want to do, maybe start alone for a bit, and then once you're comfortable in what you're doing, then bring other people in, or then meet other people. But also I could see the value of starting with other people, and that way you're less anxious about making something, or if it's more community based or something like that. There's a lot of benefits that can go either way. I can't really speak to the other way because I started out alone for a long time and making things by myself before I really started reaching out to other photographers. But yeah, so whatever feels right for you, I guess. Do you create for the pleasure of those who will witness your work, or is it a need for yourself to get by? I definitely do it because I want to do it, but obviously I'd be lying if I said that it isn't really great that people actually want to see what I make and people are waiting for new art from me, especially in the sense that a lot of the things that I make I might not be super satisfied with. I might make something I think it's passable, it's like a 6 out of 10 or something, but I'll post it on Instagram and Twitter and people will love it. People will say, this is the best thing you've ever made. Kind of taking yourself out of the equation really helps, I find, in the sense that external validation is nice and internal validation is really important, but also knowing that there is almost raw value in the thing you're making that somebody else could really enjoy. For me, that always just kind of drives me to make more things, because I might make something that I think is okay, but someone else might love it, and yeah, that's a really cool thing. Have you ever received negativity for your work? If so, how do you deal with it so it doesn't affect you too much? Once in a while, but not too much, honestly. I think most of the time on social media, unless if someone absolutely hates something and thinks it's really dumb, then they'll leave like a negative comment. But my page is not like so big that people will just randomly stumble onto it and troll or whatever. I think most of the people that are there, they like what I'm doing, so it's usually positive comments or at least something like affirming. And even if I were to receive negative criticism or negative feedback that isn't constructive in nature, most of the criticisms you could have about my work I've already thought of, in the sense that I'm super self-critical. So I would be very surprised if somebody said something about my work that I hadn't already thought of it, and if anything, that would be kind of good because it would give me more feedback to work with. So as much as I think social media can be really toxic at times, I think sometimes a bit of constructive criticism that might lean towards being negative or might lean towards hate even might be good. It's good perspective, at least, if you don't take it to heart and if you're not getting too much of it, I guess. I don't know. I didn't go to university for art, so I've never really been through a crit, but part of me would love it. But that's also saying that from the outside looking in, so maybe it's terrible and it makes you feel like absolutely garbage about your work, but part of me would like that brutal honesty that comes from a crit. Are you competitive? A little bit. I'm more competitive with myself though, or if I see somebody doing something really cool, I will want to do better, not necessarily to match them, but to I see the potential in myself, and so when I see someone doing great things, I say, oh well, why can't I do that, instead of I want to do what they're doing and be as good as them. There are always going to be people that are better than you, but for me, I try to keep it more about me making myself the best that I could be, instead of me matching somebody else and being better than them or something. Do you see artists as your competition in the field, or are you your own competition? A bit of both. I think you have to necessarily be aware of what other people are doing. So, I mean, if you want to be successful, I guess you need to be aware of the trends and where certain styles are going and what's popular at the time. Or you can just completely do your own thing and not really care and just hope for the best. I'm more a fan of the former, just being aware of everything and being knowledgeable about a field that you want to be successful in. I think that makes common sense. But at the end of the day, I know that I am ultimately what stands in my way more than anybody else. So as much as I might look at other people's art and judge myself based on what I see, I know that I need to do it for me. How do you view positive response and criticism coming your way? When you feel offbeat about an artwork yet receive praise, how does that make you feel and how do you view it? Sometimes it is a bit frustrating that there is such an incongruency between what I think is good and what the public thinks is good, but I've struggled with that for a while. But I think at the end of the day, it's always going to happen, and when those few times where it does happen that I think something that I make is really good and people generally like it, that is awesome, but it's few and far between. So I don't really stress too much about that anymore. I just try to make things that I think are good. If somebody else likes it, that's awesome. If they don't, that's okay too. Do you view positive criticism equally from all subjects? I don't. I value it all. Obviously, if somebody has something nice to say, that's objectively a good thing. You know, somebody likes your work. But I think that there's different sources of where these praise can come from, in different contexts that every person brings to the table. So for example, somebody who just kind of isn't a fan of art in general and has no actual background in art their opinion doesn't not matter, but I would personally value the opinion of somebody who studies art and who is an artist and who works through the problems that artists work through and can look at something and say that that's nice a bit more than a layman. Not that there's anything wrong with not having all this knowledge about art or anything, but obviously I think there is a bit of a hierarchy in terms of praise in that sense, and I value everybody's comments, obviously, and it's appreciated, but I think I'd be lying if I said that it all felt the same. How does positive criticism affect you? Does it play a role, or your own criticism at the end of the day is what matters most? Definitely my own. Like I just said, obviously it's very nice when people have nice things to say, but if people like something that I don't like, and I'm not making things that make me happy, then that will make me not happy. But seriously though, I think you can be miserable but have all the praise in the world coming at you. And I think we see that a lot with celebrities and people like this who are inundated with positive comments from people and their fans, and these are the most miserable, depressed people that you'll ever meet in your life, and they'll be chilling in their yachts but are in really dark places mentally. So I think being self-critical and being happy from an internal place is much better than being validated from an external place. So ultimately, it's really affirming knowing that there are people out there that like what I do, but at the end of the day, what matters is how I feel. What are some of the biggest challenges you run into when editing? I usually try to plan everything in advance, so when I go into Photoshop, there isn't too many things that'll come out of nowhere that will kind of surprise me. And a lot of my edits are usually basic techniques kind of stretched to their extreme. So most of the time, I'm just going to be doing basic compositing, which is taking images from one shoot and adding it to another, or taking elements from one photo and adding it to another. And depending on what the concept is, it could be a lot of elements or one element in particular, or taking elements from the same shoot and combining them together to make it look natural from one shoot. But there aren't too many things that come out of nowhere. But there are some times where something might not work out as easily as I thought it would, because you go into a shoot thinking, oh, I'll be able to do this in Photoshop, and then you bring it into Photoshop and you realize, oh, I was very ambitious thinking I could do that. But usually it works out. I don't think it's ever happened where something has been completely scrapped because I couldn't figure out how to edit or how to make what I wanted to happen. Do you imagine the final image or the story it tells first? Definitely the final image. I kind of alluded to this earlier, where most of the time I'm not really trying to tell a story or a narrative with my images. I'm more so trying to probe at general ideas, kind of gesture towards conflict and division and things like this in my images, instead of telling a specific story about this person did this and now they're doing this at them. And it's more about just making a scene and kind of throwing the viewer into the middle of something, or at least giving the sense that something's happening. I'm going to put you into the middle of this scene with as little context as possible, and I'm more interested in kind of the subjective associations that come from doing that to a viewer than about telling a very pointed story like A happens, B happens, C happens, D happens. How long does it take to produce each photo? It really depends on the image. So some images can take up to like 30 hours to edit in total, depending on how much compositing is involved and how long the shoot is and if I have to reshoot. But I'd say the average time is somewhere between 10 to 20 hours. It really depends on the image though. Why black hoodies? This question in particular alludes to the fact that I use a lot of black hoodies or black cloaks or coats in my images, and for me it's not really about using the hoodie or the kind of material. It's more so about taking the context away from the figure and just kind of making all the figures placeholders instead of actually people. So you might see a figure in an image, and for me, if I see somebody's face, if I see their clothing and the style of clothes they're wearing, if I see their hair, it immediately kind of adds context clues to who they are, where they come from, what they might do, all this kind of things. And I don't want that for the figures in my images. I want them to be placeholders. And so for me, the easiest way to do that is to not show their face, not show their skin, hide everything about them, and just throw something black that kind of just shows the figure more than anything. So it's not really about hoodies in particular. It's more just about making them serve the image instead of having the image be about who this person is in a frame, because I don't really care about the specific people in the image. It's more about the concept and what they're doing in the image. It's about the image as a whole for me. Do you involve your friends in your projects? How do you do it? I do. A lot of my images, if they're not just me, will be friends of mine who are also photographers or artists in one way or another. The more dangerous photos, it's always me, because I don't want to put anybody at harm's way or in harm's way. So a lot of the more dangerous photos are self-portraits, but for the images where it'll just be somebody standing or somebody posing more or less, it'll often be somebody else who's also dressed in black and just you can't see their face, so you would never know. But some images lend themselves better to self-portraits, and some I need to actually be behind the camera, because going back and forth with my programmable remote can be a bit frustrating. Thinking that you're in the right position and doing the right pose, and then you go to check your camera after 10 minutes of posing and firing, and you've taken like 100 photos, you go back and realize, oh, these are all trash, okay, I have to do that again. So sometimes asking somebody to help and stand there and to do exactly what you need, and to know like, okay, the focus is on, they're perfectly in the spot they're supposed to be, they're doing the pose. It's a lot easier doing that sometimes. So that's all the questions I received. Thank you so much to ConcordiART and everybody who asked these questions for asking them. I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like to check out my work, you can check it out at the link in right here. It's my website, it's my portfolio. I'm on Instagram as well, it's Sean J. Mundy. I'm on Twitter at Sean Mundy Photo. And I hope you have a great day and take care of yourself. Cheers.